what advice would you have from your own experience? What would you say for people who are navigating that part in their own lives?
Keep going. And it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. It's all about what you want to create. Because how do you know what you can create until you keep going with where your mind's leading you? I love everywhere I go, and for different reasons. And I just enjoy the adventure of it. And I mean, I could land here for the rest of my life and be happy. A lot of success in general with anything is to just figure things out and take things when you get an opportunity, take it and try it. You never know what you can do until you try or until you challenge yourself. And that's a great part of being creative or just human in general.
Welcome to the podcast, Katie.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you.
I cannot tell you how excited I am. And I was holding off for this story because I really wanted to record this. You know how I found you? I just mentioned before we started recording. I was I recently, enrolled myself into my fashion course, and we had this one of the earliest assignments that we had to go onto the internet, find an artist we really love, and copy her work or his work. So I quickly went onto the internet. I quickly, went on Pinterest and I searched and made a few searches, and I found your work. At that point, it wasn't Katie Rodgers and it was paper fashion illustrations. And oh my goodness. And I copied one of your works. I'm going to send that picture to you. And I'm going to also link it here. And it was this red. I remember you were making these beautiful ink drawings and these runway fashion drawings, and I was doing fashion. And oh my God, I was so obsessed. I still am. But my God, you were one of the first real person, as an artist, when I felt like, okay, this is an artist I want to follow, I want to love. And you were one of those early people. So for me, this is very special because I found you, you were one of my inking to my passions. So thank you so much for coming.
Oh, that's so nice. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm so happy to be here and hear that story. It brings me back to something that feels like another life to me.
So from being paper fashions, and I remember that was, I think, early years of your work, but you really took off. You were doing these amazing shows, live paintings, and I think it was early years of internet also. I think very few artists were on the internet, let alone have a website. You had a website. I remember because I was doing a thorough research on you, and you were all over Pinterest, and there was so much article and press and media. From then to here, you've had so many new changes and evolutions, and you've evolved so much as an artist. What do you have to say about it? How does that change and this journey feels?
I mean, it's such a big question. It's um, I've been thinking a lot about it the past few years, especially. I think it's just, I started everything when I was in my early 20s, and it was something that came from my youth, my childhood, really, is that I grew up in sort of a countryside area in Georgia, and I would just dream about fashion. I was like, this is so opposite from where I live. I grew up with three brothers. We would just play outside in the dirt all day. And I loved that. But I was like, what is this other world I see in magazines and, on TV? And I was mesmerized by that. And I was just determined. I always knew I would leave where I was from. And I just wanted to see what that world was. And I became obsessed with it. And I started drawing fashion because of that. And I think over the years, I loved it, and it became a business at a certain point. And all of those things change I mean, it just shifts a little bit as you go from hobby dream world to business.
And you're not prepared for it because we look at it very differently.
Yeah, exactly. I was not prepared for it because I didn't set out necessarily to make that happen. But as it started happening, I think it continued to happen because I did love it. And I loved the business side of things, and I still do.
Oh,
I
you
find
did?
it
Wow.
really, yeah, I found it fascinating. And it was like, I love solving problems and figuring things out. So it was sort of like diving into, okay, I love art, cool. But like, what do I do with this? And, I would just like spend all night, like, thank God for the internet. And I would just Google all night long and try to figure things out and how to make it work. But I think over the years, I started to grow up and you start to become yourself and get to know yourself. And I think over those years, I started to change a bit. And, I was so young when I started, and like, how could you know? Like, I wasn't ready to, or not that I wasn't ready, but I was just beginning my journey, I think, into that world. And I think it's like crazy to me that I would just stop there. Like I'm gonna keep going and keep digging in.
Also, I think, did you feel at that point in, you have evolved so much as an artist. And it's so exciting for me, for someone who, who's following your work. And, and also when you follow someone, for with me, the pattern that, I found you, I was obsessed by you. And somewhere in between, life happened, of course, for all of us. And and I missed, and I didn't know where you were, what was happening. And one day I found you back on Instagram, and it was like, oh, when it was so exciting for me to see your work, because at that point it looked different, and then it looked different. But I just don't know. There's always this aesthetic. I don't know, if sometimes you just don't love someone just because of there's something more than just the way someone makes a work or something. And I was so intrigued, and I was so excited to see, wow, this is another thing that it opened up a new world, let's say, because I knew that part of your work. And this excited me more. Um, but what really tickled me was, I loved, because not very, like, a lot of artists have feel caged, including myself. And and we go through these phases of, we feel like we need to be known for a certain style, a certain thing, and we need to keep doing this, which feels very contrary to creative instincts, our creative ambition, our own desires. Did you feel that? When did you start to feel this shift, that you were moving away and you wanted to move forward? In fact, I think.
Yeah, I think it was 2018. It was like the moment I moved my work outside of my home, and I had worked out of my home, and my home being like a tiny New York apartment. But I had worked out of my home forever, and I was just like, I can't do it anymore. Like, I'm going crazy because it's like, your work is in such a small space too. Your work sort of infiltrates your life, and you can only use certain mediums because it gets messy. And so I moved my work out of my home, and from that point, I think everything
This was
changed.
in New York itself.
Yes, I think 2018. So I had been doing it for around 10 years at that point, probably 9 years working. But I just felt a shift in myself, and I already knew that like something was changing, and I was like, maybe I'll just get a studio. I'll try something else. Like something just didn't feel right, and so I did that. And then I started a garden because I had like a little outdoor space at my studio, and that really shifted my mind. It was just like the most incredible thing to me. It was like planting a seed and watching it grow, and it's so simple, but it really like pulled me away from fashion. And I just stopped, and it was almost like I reconnected with my childhood of how I grew
Oh,
up.
I was about to say that.
And yeah, it pulled me back to that, and I suddenly was, like, snapped out of this fantasy of the fashion world because I didn't necessarily connect to that world. I enjoyed it for a while, for sure, but it didn't truly feel like me at the end of the day, and, um, and so that point, I started to shift, and I started to, like, incorporate more nature into my work, and it was a really hard 2 years because I had been with an agency in New York for 10 years, and they had helped build my career, and they weren't happy because my numbers started to go down, which is what they measure, like social media. And my work was shifting. So clients that I was working with, they were a little confused. Yeah, and so like financially, your numbers go down. And I met with my agency in 2019, and they were like, okay, something's not working. Like, you need to figure it out. And they asked me, they said, you need to go back to what you were doing. And I just remember thinking, like, how can I go? I can't go back. Like, that's crazy. And like, part of me was like, should I go back? Am I throwing everything away? Um, so I had like a very confused 2019. And that's when I was like, I can't, something, it just didn't feel right, everything about it. And so I was like, I need to change something. So I decided to pack everything up and leave New York and just go on an adventure.
That must have taken extreme courage for you. I mean, there is one thing I feel like a lot of artists, there's one thing about finding your style, but I think another really hard phase is when you found something and then you reach a point when you know it is time to let go. And now it's another chapter, and I think we all as artists know that. And I feel like, and I also resonate with the idea. I feel like something like this in my own self. I grew up in a smaller town. I wasn't interested in fashion per se in that sense. But I thought I was interested in fashion. But what I was as a person interested in was, because I grew up in a smaller town. I would, I just when we were speaking, I would go with my mom and I would thrift those clothes, and I would, patch up things and embroidery materials. For me, that was creativity. I think that was my first form of expression I learned as a child. So I would, even before I picked up paints, I picked up, um, my mom's things and her patches and her embroideries, and I would sit with her on a tailor shop as she would piece things together. So that for me was my creativity. But then I was intrigued because when I saw that, oh, there's this whole world of fashion. And I remember when I was, being an artist, like, being a designer, and my mom used to tell me, oh, what is in fashion right now? And I would tell her, I don't know, I don't care. And I figured that I didn't like, something didn't feel right. But I've also started to notice even my own work as an artist. As I aged, I feel like I'm going back to where I came from. Even my own work as an artist, when I started painting, and then now I'm going again, resonating back to materials that felt home to me. That I think were first materials that I resonated with.
It's it's funny how that happens. Like, you sort of rediscover it. Like, you're running away from it, and then suddenly you rediscover it down the line, and it's like this magical thing.
Okay, tell me something. Were you proud of growing up in a countryside while all those years while you were working in fashion? Because for me, I think I had this journey where I felt like I wasn't very proud. I would always say this: I don't want to make these Indian paintings, I don't want to include this, like, I want to make more Western work, and like, all of that. And today I feel like I have become so much more, like, every day I want to embrace more of my culture, embrace more of handicrafts, embrace all of those aspects that at one point I absolutely didn't want. I felt like I wasn't enough if I was doing that. Did you feel any of that?
I don't know if I necessarily felt that. I know what you mean because I've had moments of that, but I think my family was sort of from all over. Like, my mom grew up in Asia, my dad grew up in the Northeast, and my grandparents were all over. And I think because of that, I didn't necessarily, like, I was born and raised in the South, but I never really felt Southern. Like, I don't feel it in my bones. So I almost felt like I was trying to find the place that I belonged. And I don't feel that where I grew up necessarily. There are aspects to it that feel like home to me. And really beautiful, but it doesn't necessarily feel like my home, if that makes sense. I don't know why, but yeah. Um, but I can see, I think I was always sort of like looking for the place, or I was looking for something to make me feel like this is my place. And I don't know if,
I
like, I
resonate with
love,
that feeling for sure.
really,
Yeah,
I feel like,
100%. 100%.
yeah, it's like I love everywhere I go and for different reasons. And I just enjoy the adventure of it. And I mean, I could land here for the rest of my life and be happy. Um, but I think I have discovered that, which to your point before, is that I grew up sort of countryside. So maybe that's why I'm more drawn to those worlds now, but it doesn't necessarily need to be where I grew up.
Yeah, makes sense. No. I think also, I think one of the hardest things about this is, on the contrary, as artists, I think we both like, I'm sure anyone who's listening to this episode who's an artist would resonate. Oh, a lot of our people, say, oh, I want to. I remember when I entered into the arts, and I say this a lot of time on the podcast. So, I didn't come from an art school, so I was at, ideally I'm a trained designer, not a trained artist, if that counts anywhere. So I remember when I started working in a shared studio space. So there were a few people, and they would, oh, you are a designer, this is an artist, this is an illustrator, this is it. So I felt like there was so much caging and so much limiting, like, um even though, as creatives ourselves, we know what we want. Like, even if someone who's trained as a I think, even if you see the field of graphic design today, it's so fluid. um Form and functions have changed, creativity has expanded, versus artists are making their own merch lines, we're making our own products. I think the lines have blurred so much because we all understand that our desires and our creative ambitions, we don't feel good being in one place. Let's say it like that. Yet, to the contrary belief, we're always set the notion of, you have to evolve in one style. You have to, uh, a lot of, we're sold the idea that for the rest of your life, you'd be making this, you'd be known for this, you want to be known for something. How does that, how did that feel, breaking that barrier for yourself? How hard was that to break it for yourself, specifically for someone like you had tremendous success with what you were doing? I think it's much easier to change when you know things are not working, but once you have everything you needed, this is your success, and then knowing that you have to walk away and start afresh.
Yeah, I think that was like the hardest thing for me to deal with. And it took me a couple of years to really work through it because exactly, it came off of that. And I was sort of like at the height of everything. And I was just like, wait, no. And then I'm like, do I have an issue where I'm like running away from something good because it's good? Like, is this some sort of like deep rooted problem? And I think that's a real thing. I don't necessarily think that was why I wanted to change, though. And I think for me, it was scary because, I eventually I parted ways with my agency, and like it was all just like a lot of change at once. It was moving, it was, not having my agency anymore. It was changing my work and being really confused about everything. And it was just, and I get messages all the time that are like, why don't you draw your dancers anymore? And I'm like, did I make like a terrible mistake? Like, did I give up too soon? And it's not necessarily that I gave up, but did I abandon those ideas too soon? And But I think the thing that really got to me was that a lot of that work I was building over a decade was built around commercial businesses and built like, with a lot of the work I was doing, it was incredible and I loved it. And I will never say didn't love it because I did, but it was all very fast and it was very like, we have to sell this and that and this. And it was all really great, but I think I got burnt out on it. I think I was just questioning it at some point, and I was like, what does any of this mean? Like, you start to have those deeper thoughts where you're like, is this all just meaningless? Because I'm touching the surface and I never have time to go, an inch deeper or a foot deeper. It's always just like it's got to be quick, and I have like 2 weeks to do a project, or I don't know. It just always felt like I never had a chance to like dive in, and it started to feel very, very meaningless to me. And that's when I started to like shift.
I think that's so strange. You know, how as artists it's like finding a balance. Like sometimes if you have it's like, how do I say it? Um, you had everything that you needed, everything an artist or any creative desires. You had best of the clients, you had someone who was representing you, you had an incredible work. But I think what you were missing was your creative satisfaction, because as a creative, if we do not, as an artist, if your heart desires to go in a certain direction, even if it fails, even if it does not make sense, even if it's a mess, you want to go down that road. And I think a lot of artists, on the contrary, struggle with a lot of artists on the comments struggle with, they make what they want, but they don't have, let's say, the financial success, the commercial success, the representation. So it's like we're always striking for this balance, which is how do we balance having that, um, following your creativity, following those ideas, and yet having that stability, yet having those credibilities, yet not feeling boxed and being tagged into one form, you know?
Right. Yeah, it's a really hard thing to figure out because of course, like for me, I had set up a few things that gave me passive income. So I gave myself some time, and I had like left New York and cut back on my expenses and things like that. And that was all part of the plan of like, I need to go see what more there is and just go on an adventure, see what happens, and explore. Because I didn't have time to explore anymore. And I just felt like I was repeating the same thing over and over, which is when you do find a style and you do find, your thing, people come to you for that thing. And it's completely understandable and it can be an amazing thing. But I think figuring out the balance now, like I'm dealing with that currently. It's like, well, what direction am I going in? And where do I see this going in terms of like living, stably and bringing in enough financially and building success around it in a way that feels authentic to me, but also doesn't totally lose people from my past. I mean, well, I will, and I have lost a lot of people from my past. It's not necessarily that, it's like sort of bridging everything.
Yeah, and I think it's evolution. I think the notion that we have to be a certain person, a certain artist throughout all our lives, I think it is too much to ask ourselves. I think, and also I feel like our art is an extension of who we are. I remember my work shifted. I feel this current shift again in my work, but I also felt that, and I think I, as a person, my work has changed so much, like in a couple of years. And I think we have that freedom when you don't have so many eyes on you. So, um, when my mom passed away, I think I felt a major, major shift because I, as a person, went into a very different place. I have changed, and that has impacted my thoughts, that has impacted what I'm looking now for, and that has impacted my art, and it changed drastically. And I think it's not changing from there. I think it's evolving as I am evolving, as my experiences are evolving. And I'm sure, like, if we do not find and embrace that, and it feels like it's very suffocating, to be honest.
Hmm. Yeah, you have to. I think it's just part of being human. And like so often you see people's work online, but there's so much going on in a human's personal life as well that you may not ever see. And those things can really shift somebody and change how they think, how they act, or not how they act, how they think and like what they want to create and just like their overall passion for something. So like a big shift like your mom passing is just it sort of like puts you on a trajectory that's a little bit different than you had experienced before, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Um, Katie, I also want to, you were one of the earliest, like how Instagram has become, and social media and online business, everything has become mainstream today. We all know that, everybody now knows, okay, being on Instagram can bring you more business, being online is important, and having to make as an artist on the internet. But I think you were one of the first earliest people who did that. You did not only do that, but also found success for the work that you were doing. I want to talk about, you know, um, from then to now, a lot of people who rose, who found a lot more attention, um, the good and bad of both the internet, how it impacts you positively, but how it also impacts you creatively. And that may not be the best case scenarios. I really want to talk to you about your journey, finding your way. Can you take me through how did you find your way and found success in New York, doing these dancing girls and paper fashion, and how it also impacted you, being an artist on the internet also impacted you as an artist, let's say.
Yeah, I think for me in the beginning, I've always, like my entire life, I love experimenting with anything and everything. And when I saw, these apps started, and I think Twitter was first and then Instagram.
You were on Twitter first.
Yeah, I was on Twitter and I remember I got my first job and I only had Twitter. And which feels so weird to me because you couldn't even post pictures back then, but I would post links to my website.
And at that time, having a website was also as in common, you know putting up a website as a illustrator, designer, artist. I think you were like pretty much you were way faster than a lot of people getting on the grip on internet.
Yeah, I just felt drawn to it. I was like, that's cool. Like the internet's cool. And I remember when I got my first, like, really, I got like a hand-me-down laptop and I was like, this is so amazing. This is cool. And I would just like stay up all night. And at that time, I had just gotten my first real job outside of college. And I felt like I suddenly had all this free time because I was used to, when you're in school, you're in school all day, you like do stuff all night and you're in a different place. And then when I started working, it was like, okay, I have after work like all this time. So I just wanted to paint. I just felt like oh, I just want to keep painting for fun because I wasn't doing that at work really. And I was like, I just want a place to put everything. So that's when I started the website, and it was all just for fun.
But how did you figure the tech? How did you, like, even I think even today artists struggle with, oh, I don't know how to set up a website. I don't know how to use social media. Were you scared of social media? Did you feel like, oh my God, this does this? Because when anything is new, we feel like, oh, is this weird? Does this make sense? Did you have those questions, and how did you find these things? I don't know how many resources were there, for artists at that point.
I don't know. I think I've always been sort of driven to do things on my own, like
So you figured all by yourself.
yeah, or like using Google or just like trying it, playing with things. Like I love doing that and like figuring it out. So that was all part of it for me, and it still very much is, even with AI and all of this. Like I play with it quite often. And I don't like share any of that, but I do like playing with it because I don't think the best way to go into new things is to say that's stupid or that's nothing. Like, because look at like the history of everything. Yeah. People have reactions when new things come around, and I'm just like, why not just try and play with it and see what happens? It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stick or it's going to work for me. But like AI, it doesn't like sing to me in the same way, but I do enjoy certain aspects of it. So it's just like playing with things, and then it like started to build from there. And then it's like, all of those things were new and I started playing with it. And then I started to like get people were like looking at things I did. And I was like, what's happening? And then I remember I started to get jobs and I was like, what's happening? This is so
What
weird.
were you doing at that point?
I was in Boston and I was working as a designer at Reebok, the shoe company. And so that was like my first job and I loved it. Um, but that's when everything started. And I just, yeah, it just all happened from there. And then, at a certain point, I took a job with them overseas in Spain.
Okay.
And
So
long
you
story
traveled
short,
a lot.
I did, yeah. And I loved that because I didn't travel much growing up at all. And so, like, being able to do that on my own in my adult life was so fun and just like exploring things. And it terrified my parents. They were like, "You're moving where? You're moving to Spain? Like, why?" Um, but I was like, "That's so fun." And in the long run, I ended up quitting that job, and because I couldn't do my art and that job, so that's what led me to doing it full time, basically. I was like, I need to choose between the two jobs.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And specifically when you were getting attention.
Because I was early on there, I started to get jobs and then I started to get really creative with the platforms. And I remember like Coach hired me, the fashion brand. And then I got a, yeah. And then I got a job with Alicia Keys, the singer. And it was like, blew me away. And I was like, I don't, like, how do I do both of these jobs? And I was charging nothing and it was but they were like the most wonderful people and I was just like there's this whole other world out there and like what would it be like if I was doing it with all of my time versus just my nights and my mornings before work and so that's when I was like weighing I had been doing it, I think, for a year or two before I decided to go full time with it. So I had sort of saved the extra money. And I was like, I remember my dad said to me, and he was an entrepreneur, and he said, like, you are have no children, you have savings, like, why not try it and see what happens? And so I did. Um, and I'm really happy I did. But it just sort of snowballed. I think like working with big brands and names at that time, and social media was so early that things started to just accumulate fast. Um, and it doesn't quite happen that way.
Yeah. You were working with all major fashion brands. You were doing these fashion runway shows, I remember. And, you know, I feel like how what I'm interested in is as someone, early in your early 20s, getting that kind of success, um, getting, having your creative dreams come true at that point, I think not from even reaching that point, a lot of people even don't go that far. They're not able to find that kind of success also with a lot of people want to have all of those things in their own creative careers, and a lot of them don't have that. But you found it pretty young and early. um, what was the hardest thing for you navigating all of this, also the world of the agencies, then working with clients, and then um, understanding what being an artist means, and how were you navigating all of this?
It was terrifying, like completely terrifying. And I think I'm very introverted and so it was really scary for me to like go to New York City and meet with an agent and like go meet with a client. That was like, I remember I met with Nabisco, like one of the first people, and it terrified me. And they asked me to do an animated video commercial sort of thing. And I used my brother. My brother and I worked on it together, and he did the music for it. And I was just like, I have no idea how to make an animation. I have no idea how to make illustrated video at all. But I never said that. I was just like, of course I can do that. And I think like that is one of the key things to a lot of success in general with anything is to just figure things out and like take things when you get an opportunity, take it and try it. I could have failed, but like it worked out. I figured it out and I learned so much so quickly having to figure that out, you know? I sort of discovered new ways to work and having to use new software to create it. And like looking back, it's like a kind of a funny video to me because it feels so like, you know, weird. But it worked at the time and it was fine. But those things are all really terrifying. And anything that you do, I think that's awesome, is terrifying. Like everything I've done that's terrifying is amazing. Like I enjoy it so much.
I think what I love the thrill of doing these things is like I feel like I keep challenging, and I have a very similar outlook. Like I would sign up for things just because I feel like, oh, this is interesting. How do I do this? But also like how far can I push myself? Like um what is possible creatively, like what is possible, like can I do this? And when I do, I'm like, oh my god, I didn't know that I had it in me. I didn't know, like I didn't think I could have the guts to take up a project like this, push myself. And I think that just that learning curve is just, it's like a creative adventure.
Yeah, exactly. And I think everything in life is like that. And if you just approach things, like when terrible things happen to me, I try to approach it in that way where it's like, okay, like this happened, and like what do I do with it? And it helps me a lot. Like, you know, it's helped me like get over things and figure things out, but it's just you have to approach things of like pushing yourself beyond it and like finding like methods to do new things and like you never know what you can do until you try or until you challenge yourself and that's like a great part of being creative or just human in general.
And I think as creative, we are naturally risk takers. I think this is the work that we do. If we start believing on our instincts, we are following our, so why not take a bigger leap? Why not rather fail than regret?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I really let that go the past 2 or 3 years and I was like stuck because I was so confused with everything I had left behind and like I wanted something else. And I think I became so critical of myself and my own work and everything that I kind of went to like a dark place. And that became debilitating where I couldn't create anything. And I just felt like everything was terrible and like I didn't even want to do like
I
create
hate those
anything new or push
stages.
myself. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard and they do happen and I learned a lot from that, but I think like the best way to get through that is to work through it, and it took me a really long time to figure that out.
And also being, I think, embracing these, because I think the most growth is also when during these periods while we are pushing ourselves, is because I think that is also a sign of knowing that you're pushing the envelope. We could have settled, you could have settled, not that people don't settle, but once you know that you want more, I think it takes a lot more conviction and courage to, I think, wanting we all want, but chasing it, risking for it, and putting in the work for it is something that really, really makes things happen. And going through these ugly, uncomfortable, lost phases.
Yeah, it's exactly that.
Now you've crafted this whole new life, whole new work, whole new creative world. So starkly different and so interesting. Um, I feel like you're like, I think people who challenge themselves, I feel like having a creative one creative life is fortunate enough, but then also living multiple. I think as creatives we create our own worlds. And once you're doing a project, and like I'm this person who would do one project and I have a phase and then I obsess, and then everything around me looks like that, everything is that part of that story. And one day I'm over with it, I feel like, okay, I'm done with this chapter, I want another story. So I feel like as creatives we have this magical power of creating this new worlds whenever we want and then live in them. So you created the first world, which was paper fashion. You lived it in 10 years, um, being on every show, and a lot of people that today desire, like on the age of social media, everybody's going to runway shows and having photographed, and all this fancy and sham. And now you've created completely opposite, a more um, grounding and more creative. I There are two different energies. How do you feel? How do these both worlds feel differently to you? And what do what are you seeking it in this one? What is your heart desire now? First, let's talk about how does it feel different, even as an artist itself.
I mean, it feels very much like the same in some sense to me of like when I'm alone in my workspace and just it feels the same way it felt when I sat at my little desk in my apartment in New York. And it's just kind of like exactly what you said, where you sort of like tunnel vision into your own world and you start to like create things. And to me, it's the same. It's the same application. It's just a different outcome that or output, I guess. And for me now, it's like I just want to feel more connected to my work. And exactly what you said, like the fashion stuff, it kind of comes with, going to events and like, which I love. Like it was so cool to see that from somebody who never experienced any of that growing up. But I quickly realized it wasn't me. It wasn't my world, and it wasn't a place that really inspired me. And so I just felt like drawn to this other world. And I didn't necessarily say, like, I'm going to move to New Mexico and like build my life there. I just came here because I felt good here and I enjoyed being in this place before I moved. And I was like, I'm just going to go there and I'm going to try and see what happens with the idea of it being temporary. And it just felt good. And it felt like creating here felt good. Um, and so in terms of like what do I want from that, it's just I want like a little bit deeper of a connection, like to my own work. Like I remember thinking in New York, I was like, I would never put this work on my own walls. And like I felt weird about that. I was like, is this a weird thing? Like, is this okay that I um and I know I wasn't necessarily creating fine art back then. I was doing a lot of commercial work, but I think I was drawn to create things that felt like me and felt grounded and connected with nature. And I always feel like my best self just when I'm like on adventures or like I'm like camping or driving across the US or just somewhere like out where I can just like see everything and I'm in nature or experiencing something and I feel free. And I think that is something I seek to like bring to my work and just find this like calm, like those places just make me feel so calm and good and they bring me a lot of peace and I think I want to bring that into my work. Um, but that is where I am right now. And I feel like I'm starting over and I feel like I'm just beginning.
Yeah, because I think that, the notion, it does feel like that, but ideally, I don't think it truly is necessary that way. Because for me, let's say, I've been following you for so long. For me, it feels like I have been following you on this adventure, and for me, it's like, it's just the same you. Um, it's like it still feels the same. I don't know if that makes sense. And I think even as a person, um, I think we think that as creators you're starting over, but you've brought a ton of experiences that you've learned, um, and I think also like pit stops. I see my journey. I often see this. We're on a journey where sometimes we have to go faster, and that may necessarily mean like the work we're doing, the life we're living, and then there are days that you want to just slow down and you don't want to work and you just want to go in, and so it's like there are seasons in life um, where you're doing the work that's rigorous, that's fast, and that requires you to be out. And then there are phases that you would want to rest and regenerate and find yourself and connect with yourself. And when you feel ready, you're going to be out there back, and then you'll come back again in. So I think it's like a toss that keeps happening. At least I feel that way.
It is, and I feel like I'm just coming back in terms of like sharing things. Like for a long time, I felt like very insecure about sharing the past few years on anything online because I was so confused myself.
Did you disappear?
I kind of stopped posting much, and I mean, here and there I would, but I just needed to like retreat, and that's when I started working on farms and just like doing different things.
Yeah,
Yeah. And now I feel like I'm ready to like inject some energy back into it again. So that feels good.
I love that. I've loved your travels. I love your stories. Oh my God, the scenery. It is so gorgeous. What does a typical day look like for you now? And I love your studio. It looks like or the chemistry lab. Totally. I can see those portals and I
Yeah, my typical day now, I mean, my days are pretty quiet. Um, now and then I'm outside a lot. And then I tend to work like certain times of day. And then, once or twice a week, I work on a flower farm. And I don't know, like my days are so whatever needs to be done, it changes a lot. So, but I work at home and it's just different. It's different than like the past life I've had working in cities, and like I just have a little bit more space and it just feels more free. Like, yes.
for sure. I moved away from my parents' house when I was 18. Spent 10 years living by myself in the capital, in Delhi. And growing up in a smaller town, I always enjoyed the smaller space. We used to have a garden, we would play outside, we would walk outside, and it felt so natural, even though not like it's not the same as that. But even today, whenever I'm here in Agra and I've been staying here for the past 2 years, I feel so much more connected to nature. I feel like I have the liberty, like to be outside, just to be, and it feels like the biggest luxury.
Yeah, it is. And I'm like, I love to be barefoot so much. And so I love
Oh,
being
same here.
somewhere where I can,
Same.
yeah, it's so nice. And I can just like open the door and walk outside. And like that is like a gift to me. Like, I don't know if I can not have that again in my life.
Okay, one last question for anyone who's in a similar state of life. Let's say who feels who's still either finding themselves or refining themselves. And I'm going to take this advice because I feel like I'm also right where at that point. What advice would you have from your own experience? What would you say for people who are navigating that part in their own lives? Artists, women.
I think that, like, for me, once I get a seed in my head, and it's like the seed of like, you're thinking of something else, or you want to change, or something's not right, I can't ignore that. And so I think it's easy to want to ignore it and stay comfortable. But to me, I see no difference between the uncomfortableness of changing and the uncomfortableness of not changing. So it's like, which one propels you forward? You're going to change. If you don't change, I think you will be so like uninspired. People around you will feel that, and it will just radiate from you that that's not what it doesn't feel authentic to you. So, like, if you feel the need to change or find yourself, keep going. And like, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. It's all about what you want to create. Because, like, how do you know what you can create until you keep going with where your mind's leading you or your gut?
Yes. God, that is wonderful. Thank you so much, Katie. I am so, so grateful for your time. Thank you for sharing with us. I know it's been it's been our pleasure to have you here. And before I let you go, for anyone who's listening, how can we support you? Where can we find your work? How can we support your work? And if you have anything upcoming, would you like to share with us?
I do. I have a campaign coming out that is sort of linked to my past world, and it's coming out very soon. I did a holiday campaign, and it will come out in the next few weeks, and I'm excited to share that. And but yeah, just any support is always welcome on social media or my website if you find interest in my work. But yeah, I've really enjoyed talking to you, and it's nice to talk across the world.
Same here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.